Well, I got interested in apologetics because of how I came to faith. So I was raised as a Christian by my parents. And at the time that I was in high school, I was living in England. And we didn't really get plugged into a church. But I still had some friends who were Christians and some that were not. And I would often get questions about my faith raised to me. And so some of them were challenging questions like, well, why do you believe Jesus is even real? And how do you know that he rose from the grave? And I didn't really have any answers to these questions. And so it didn't take long for me to abandon my sort of nascent Christian faith in high school. And so most of high school and college, I sort of lived for my own desires and whatever, and just did some things that I regret. But nevertheless, I wasn't a Christian at the time. Now, when I got to college, I started doing some research for a professor of anatomy who was encouraging me to do some work with him. And so we would sit in a lab for hours and hours on end and talk. And it turned out that this guy was a Christian. Now, this is a secular university. It's California State University in Long Beach. And but he was a Christian, and he discovered in our conversations that I used to be a Christian, but no longer am anymore. So he asked me, why aren't you a Christian anymore? And I said, because there's no reason to become a Christian. He said, well, what if I could introduce you to some reasons why you might consider being a Christian? I said, well, okay, I don't think there are any, but feel free. And so he introduced me to the field of apologetics. He actually gave me a book written by J.P. Moreland called Scaling the Secular City, one of his older books. And he actually took me to an event where J.P. Moreland was speaking. And I was very intrigued by this. And so for the next year, he introduced me to more and more of this apologetic stuff that was completely new to me. And after a year of investigating, I became overwhelmed with how much evidence and reason there was to think that Christianity was actually true. Like not just a personal faith or a hope or a wishing, but it was actually true. Like if you had a GoPro camera at Jesus' tomb, you could see him like literally rise from the grave. So that kind of true, right? And so I, at that point, then recommitted my life to Christ. And then as I began to nurture sort of my nascent Christian walk, I began to ask myself the question, why was I never told all of these reasons and arguments and evidence for Christianity when I was younger? And so it became a passion of mine to want to then go back into the church and equip believers to understand some of the basics of what we believe and why we believe it. And so, of course, that naturally brought me to apologetics.
Awesome. And then